High Commander Thiessen stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the small blue planet on the main screen with the same expression he always wore when the Dominion found a new world to conquer: boredom, mixed with a touch of amusement. The Valori Dominion had ruled the Orion Spur for 12,000 years, and in all that time they had never met a species they could not crush beneath their boots. They had conquered 800 worlds and enslaved countless billions. And this little planet called Earth would be no different. "Commander, the primitives are broadcasting on radio frequencies," his sensor officer reported. "They have crude satellites in orbit and appear to have landed on their moon approximately 50 of their years ago." Thiessen clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his kind. A species that had barely touched their own moon was supposed to resist the might of 40 Valori warships? "Standard subjugation protocol," he ordered without even looking away from the screen. "Target 3 of their largest coastal population centers and demonstrate our power. They will surrender within hours." His weapons officer acknowledged the command and began the targeting sequence. The Valori had done this so many times that it was almost boring at this point far below on the planet's surface. Humanity went about its ordinary day without any idea that their world was about to change forever. Children went to school, workers sat in offices, and families prepared their evening meals in 3 cities that would soon exist only in memory. The first plasma bolt struck the city of Mumbai at exactly 6:14 in the evening local time, and in a single heartbeat 12 million lives ended. The second bolt hit Snowpalo 3 seconds later, and another 8 million souls vanished in fire and light. The third struck Los Angeles and added 7 million more to the death toll from orbit. Thiessen watched the mushroom clouds rise from the planet's surface and felt nothing but satisfaction at a job well done. In his experience, primitive species always broke after such a display of overwhelming force. "Open a channel to the planet," he commanded. "Broadcast our standard surrender demands in their primary languages." The communications officer worked his console, and soon Thiessen's message was playing across every television, radio, and internet connection on Earth. He told the humans that they were now subjects of the Valori Dominion, and that any resistance would result in the complete destruction of their civilization. Then he sat back in his command chair and waited for the groveling response that always came in its past, and nothing happened. The planet had gone completely silent. "Commander," his communications officer said with confusion in his voice, "all transmissions from the planet have ceased. Every broadcast, every signal, they have all stopped." Thiessen frowned. This was unusual, but not concerning. Perhaps the primitives were too shocked to respond. An hour passed and still nothing. 2 hours, and the silence continued. By the third hour, Thiessen was beginning to feel something he had not felt in centuries: uncertainty. "Are their communication systems damaged?" he asked. "No, Commander. The systems are intact. They simply are not using them." On the planet below, something unprecedented was happening. For the first time in human history, every nation on Earth had stopped fighting each other and started talking. Emergency meetings were held in bunkers and secure facilities around the world as military leaders and politicians faced a threat that made all their petty conflicts seem meaningless. In a bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Elena Vasquez of the United States Space Command looked at the satellite images of the destroyed cities and felt a cold rage building in her chest. She had lost friends in Los Angeles, and she could see the same fury in the eyes of every person in the room. "They expect us to surrender," said a Russian general through a translator, his fists clenched on the table. "They do not know us," General Vasquez replied. "They do not know what we are in Beijing, London, Moscow, and 100 other capitals." Similar conversations were happening. The aliens had made a terrible miscalculation. They had assumed that a show of force would break humanity's will to fight. They did not understand that humanity had been forging itself in the fires of war since before they discovered how to make tools. They did not know about the trenches of World War I or the horrors of World War II. They had no concept of Stalingrad or Thermopylae or the 1,000 other battles where humans had chosen death over surrender 12 hours after the bombardment. A response finally came from Earth. The Sin straightened in his chair as his communications officer announced an incoming transmission. Finally, the primitives would beg for mercy. The main screen flickered and showed a human male in a military uniform. He was older with gray hair and hard eyes that seemed to look directly at Thiessen, despite the vast distance between them. Behind him stood representatives from every major nation on Earth, united for the first time in their species' history. The human spoke, and the translator rendered his words in Valori. His voice was calm and steady, with no trace of fear or desperation. To the commanders of the alien fleet in our orbit, the human began. You have attacked our world without warning and killed 27 million of our people. You have destroyed 3 of our cities and demanded our surrender. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made even Thiessen lean forward. You have made a mistake. We do not know how to surrender. We only know how to win or how to make sure you never forget the cost of fighting us. You came here expecting easy prey, but you have found something else. You have awakened a species that has spent 10,000 years learning how to wage war. We have fought ice ages and plagues and famines. We have survived everything this universe has thrown at us. And now we will survive you. The human's eyes seemed to burn with an inner fire as he delivered his final words. You want war? Congratulations, you have just begun a war with the galaxy's most lethal creatures. We are humanity, and we do not break. The transmission ended and silence filled the bridge of Thiessen's flagship. His officers exchanged uncertain glances that they quickly tried to hide. Thiessen laughed. What else could he do but laugh at such absurd bravado from a species that had never even left their own star system? Prepare the ground forces, he ordered. We will crush these primitives and teach them the price of defiance. But deep in the part of his mind where instinct lived, a small voice whispered that something was wrong, that these creatures were different from all the others, that perhaps the Dominion had finally found something it could not conquer. Thiessen ignored that voice. It would be the last mistake he ever made on Earth. Humanity began to prepare. Factories that had made cars started making weapons. Laboratories that had studied medicine started studying the alien technology recovered from a crashed scout ship. Soldiers from every nation trained together and learned to fight as one. The aliens had given humanity something it had never had before, a common enemy, and now that enemy was going to learn what happens when you threaten what humans love. Ambassador Kethra of the Neutral Concord arrived in Seoul system 3 weeks after the initial bombardment, and what she found there would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. The Concord was an alliance of species that had chosen neutrality over conflict. They served as mediators and observers in galactic affairs. Kethra had been sent to negotiate a peaceful absorption of Earth into the Valerie Dominion, because that was how these things always went. Dominion crushed resistance, and then the Concord helped clean up the mess, but Earth was not following the script. Her shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere with a Valori escort, and she watched the landscape below with growing unease. She had expected to see a broken world filled with refugees and ruins, but instead she saw something else entirely. Factories worked around the clock with smoke rising from thousands of chimneys. Military convoys moved along highways in organized formations. Defensive positions had been dug into hillsides and mountains with a speed that should have been impossible. This is wrong, she murmured to herself. They should be defeated by now. The shuttle landed at a military base in what the humans called Switzerland, and Kethra was escorted to a meeting room by soldiers who moved with the calm efficiency of veterans. These were not broken people begging for mercy. These were warriors. Preparing for a long fight, General Elena Vasquez waited for her in the meeting room. The human female was small by Kethra's standards, with gray hair and wrinkled skin that marked her as old for her species. But her eyes were sharp and alert, and she smiled when Kethra entered. That smile made Kethra nervous for reasons she could not explain. "Ambassador," General Vasquez said in accented but understandable Galactic standard, "welcome to Earth. I apologize that we cannot offer better hospitality, but we have been rather busy lately." Kethra settled into the chair provided for her and activated her translator. She had dealt with hundreds of species over her long career, and she knew how to read body language. What she saw in the human's posture was not fear or desperation, but something closer to anticipation, like a predator waiting for prey to come within striking distance. "General Vasquez," Kethra began, "I am here to discuss terms for your planet's integration into the Valori Dominion. Surely you understand that resistance is futile. The Dominion has conquered 800 worlds and commands a fleet of millions of ships. Your species has never even left this system." The general's smile did not waver. If anything, it grew wider. "Let me show you something, Ambassador." She pressed a button, and a holographic display appeared above the table. It showed technical schematics that Kethra recognized. Immediately, Valori shield generators. 3 weeks ago, we recovered a crashed Valori scout ship from what your people call the Pacific Ocean, the general explained. Our scientists have been studying it ever since. We have already reverse-engineered the shield frequency modulation and developed weapons that can penetrate Valori armor. Kethra felt her blood run cold. 3 weeks, that was impossible. Most species took decades to understand Valori technology, and these primitives had cracked it in less than a month. That is not possible," she stammered. "We are a very motivated species, Ambassador. Nothing focuses the human mind quite like the threat of extinction." The general changed the display and showed something else, video footage of Valori soldiers in what appeared to be a human detention facility. They were alive but clearly distressed, and humans in white coats were speaking to them through translators. "We have also captured 7 of your enemy soldiers," the general continued. "They have been most helpful in teaching us about Valori culture and military tactics. Your friends made a mistake when they attacked us without learning anything about us first." Kethra watched the footage with growing horror. The Valori prisoners looked broken in a way she had never seen before. Their compound eyes were dull, and their movements were slow and defeated. "What did you do to them?" she asked. "We talked to them, Ambassador. We took shifts so that someone was always with them. We learned their language and their customs and their fears. We were very patient and very thorough." The general leaned forward, and her smile finally faded into something much more serious. "The Valori think they understand war, but they do not. They understand conquest. They understand overwhelming force and easy victories. But war, real war, is something different. It is brutal and personal, and it does not end when one side is stronger. It ends when one side decides to stop fighting." She tapped the table for emphasis. "We will never stop fighting. That is something your Dominion friends need to understand. You could kill 90% of our population, and the survivors would spend their last breaths trying to hurt you. It is not logical, and it is not efficient, but it is who we are." Kethra had studied many species in her career, and she had developed categories for them in her mind. There were the builders who created and traded. There were the philosophers who sought knowledge. There were the conquerors, like the Valori, who dominated through strength, but humans did not fit any category she knew. They seemed to be all of these things at once, and something else besides, something old and dangerous that lurked beneath their civilized surface. Have a report from one of our intelligence sources? Kethra said carefully, a Valori officer who survived an encounter with your soldiers. He said something that I did not understand. He said that humans do not sleep. General Vasquez laughed. It was a warm sound, but there was something sharp hidden within it. We sleep, Ambassador. Just not very much when we are angry. And right now we are very angry indeed. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, Kethra could see soldiers training in the courtyard and aircraft flying overhead in tight formations. Do you know what makes humanity dangerous, Ambassador? It is not our strength or our technology. It is our memory. We remember everything. Every insult, every injury, every wrong done to us. We write it down and we teach it to our children. We hold grudges that last for generations. She turned back to face Kethra with eyes that held no warmth. 27 million of our people died in those first attacks. We have recorded every name. We will remember every face. And we will not rest until everyone responsible has answered for what they did. Kethra felt a chill run through her body, despite the warmth of the room. She had come here expecting to negotiate a surrender, and instead she had found something that terrified her more than any Valori fleet. I will convey your position to the Dominion, she said quietly. Please do, Ambassador. And tell them something else for me. The general walked to the door and paused with her hand on the frame. Tell them that we are coming. Maybe not today and maybe not tomorrow, but eventually we will bring this war to their doorstep. And when we do, they will learn what it means to fight a species that refuses to die. She opened the door and gestured for Kethra to leave. We are not trapped on this planet with them, Ambassador. They are trapped in this system with us. As Kethra walked back to her shuttle, she could not shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something historic, the moment when the galaxy's balance of power began to shift. These humans were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting with a fury that transcended logic or reason, and somehow she knew that the Valori Dominion had no idea what was coming for them. 6 months into the war, High Commander Thiessen had stopped sleeping. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of dead soldiers and burning ships, and he heard the screams of his troops as they fought an enemy that simply would not die. The humans should have been exterminated by now. The mathematics were simple and undeniable. The Dominion had 40 warships to Earth's 0. They had millions of soldiers to humanity's scattered armies. They had technology that was centuries more advanced, and yet somehow they were losing. Thiessen stood in his command center surrounded by holographic displays that showed the current state of the war, and every single display told the same story. Disaster after disaster after disaster. Report. He ordered his staff and braced himself for more. Bad news, Commander. We have lost another supply convoy in the asteroid belt. Human raiders attacked at coordinates 749 and destroyed all 6 transport ships. Before we could respond, how many humans? Our sensors detected a single vessel, Commander. A modified mining ship with improvised weapons. Thiessen felt his mandibles click in frustration. One tiny ship crewed by perhaps a dozen. Humans had destroyed supplies meant for an entire battalion. And the landing forces on the northern continent? His ground commander stepped forward with the look of someone who would rather be anywhere else. The offensive has stalled, Commander. The humans have fortified the mountain passes, and our forces cannot advance. They are using a combination of conventional weapons and improvised explosives that our armor cannot withstand. Explain how primitives with crude weapons are stopping our advance. The ground commander hesitated before continuing. They do not fight like any species we have encountered before. They do not hold defensive lines or engage in set-piece battles. Instead, they attack and then vanish before we can respond. They hide in tunnels and buildings and forests, and they strike when we least expect it, then burn the forests and collapse the tunnels. "We have tried, Commander. They simply move to new positions and continue fighting." And there is something else. The commander brought up a video file on the main display, and Thiessen watched with growing disbelief. The footage showed a human soldier, a young female barely out of adolescence by their standards, charging directly at a Valerie defensive position. She was carrying what appeared to be explosives strapped to her chest, and she was screaming something that the translator could not properly render. The explosion killed her and 7 Valori soldiers. The camera feed cut to static. "They call it a sacrifice attack," the ground commander said quietly. "They willingly died to take our soldiers with them. We have recorded over 300 such incidents in the past month alone." Thiessen stared at the frozen image on the screen and tried to understand what he was seeing. What kind of species willingly died like this? What kind of evolutionary pressure could possibly create creatures that valued hurting their enemies more than preserving their own lives? "There is a word in their language," his intelligence officer spoke up, "a concept that we do not have an equivalent for. They call it spite." "Explain." "It is difficult, Commander." The closest translation would be a form of aggression that persists even when victory is impossible. A human who acts out of spite will accept their own destruction if it means harming their enemy. It is not about winning. It is about making the enemy suffer. The intelligence officer pulled up more data on his screen. "We have analyzed their history, and the pattern is consistent throughout. Humans have fought wars that lasted for decades over insults to their honor. They have destroyed their own cities rather than let enemies capture them. They have starved themselves to death rather than submit to occupation." He looked up at Thiessen with something close to fear in his compound eyes. "They are not rational, Commander. Or rather, they have a different definition of rational. To a human, it is perfectly logical to sacrifice everything, including their own life, if it means their enemy suffers enough." Thiessen thought about the supply convoy ambushed in the asteroid belt and realized something terrible. The humans had not attacked that convoy to win the war. They knew they could not win through such small actions. They had attacked it purely to hurt the Dominion, to make them pay for every inch of ground they took before. He could respond. An alarm blared through the command center and officers scrambled to their stations. "Commander, we have an emergency report from the Karov system. Karev 4 was a supply station 4 light years from Earth. It was supposed to be safely behind Dominion lines and protected by a garrison of 3,000 soldiers. What happened? The station has been attacked, Commander. The fuel reserves have been destroyed, and the garrison reports heavy casualties. Which fleet attacked them?" The officer hesitated before answering. It was not a fleet, Commander. It was 12 humans. The command center went silent. Thiessen felt something cold crawl down his spine. That is impossible. Humans do not have faster-than-light capability. They stole one of our damaged transport ships from a battlefield on Earth. They spent 9 days learning to operate it, and then they flew it to Karev 4. They landed disguised as a maintenance crew, and then the officer stopped and swallowed hard. They what? They fought their way through the entire station, Commander. 12 of them against 3,000 of our soldiers. The battle lasted for 6 hours before they reached the fuel reserves and destroyed them. Then they escaped into the asteroid belt where they have been launching raids on our patrols. Thiessen looked around at his staff and saw his own disbelief reflected in their faces. 12 humans had traveled 4 light years in a stolen ship that they had taught themselves to fly, and then they had crippled a fortified station, and escaped it was impossible. It was insane. It was exactly what he should have expected from this species. They are still out there? He asked. Yes, Commander. Our ships have been hunting them for 3 weeks, but they keep disappearing. They attack and then vanish into the asteroids. We have lost 14 patrol craft trying to find them. 12 humans are destroying our patrols? They have. The officer checked his data. They have converted the asteroid belt into a network of hidden bases and weapons caches. They seem to be surviving on captured supplies, and they show no signs of surrendering or retreating. Thiessen turned away from his staff and stared at the star map on the main display. Earth was still there, defiant and unbowed, despite everything the Dominion had thrown at it. And now its people were spreading across the system like a virus, striking where they were not expected and vanishing before they could be caught. What kind of species are we fighting? He asked to no one in particular. His intelligence officer answered anyway. Species that spent its entire existence fighting itself, Commander. They have been at war since before they discovered fire. They've never stopped learning how to kill. Every generation has added new weapons and new tactics to their arsenal. He brought up an image of Earth on the display. They call their world a death world. The gravity is crushing. The weather is violent. The native life forms are constantly trying to eat each other. Everything on that planet has evolved to survive against impossible odds. The officer looked at Thiessen with something that might have been pity. We did not invade a primitive world, Commander. We invaded a world that creates monsters. And now those monsters are learning how to reach the stars. Thiessen thought about the young human who had charged his soldiers with explosives strapped to her chest. He thought about the 12 raiders who were terrorizing an entire system from an asteroid belt. He thought about the endless defiance that met every demand for surrender for the first time in his long career. He wondered if the Valori Dominion had finally found an enemy it could not defeat, and that thought terrified him more than any weapon ever could. By the first year of the war, the entire galaxy had started to pay attention to the small blue planet called Earth and the strange, stubborn creatures that lived there. Ambassador Kethra watched the conflict unfold from her office in the neutral Concord headquarters with a mixture of fascination and terror. She had sent dozens of reports to the Concord leadership about the humans, and each report had been more alarming than the last. The Valori Dominion, undefeated for 12,000 years, was bleeding. Their subjugation fleet had tripled in size, and then tripled again. Their supply lines stretched across dozens of systems. Their casualties mounted with every passing day, and still the humans held. They had done more than hold. They had grown stronger. In just 11 months, they had developed faster-than-light capability, a process that took most species centuries of research. They had reverse-engineered Valori weapons and made them better. They had turned their planet into a fortress, bristling with defenses. That made the Dominion pay for every attack. But what truly caught the galaxy's attention was something that no one had expected: the alliances. 3 species that had been conquered by the Dominion generations ago had sent volunteers to fight alongside the humans. The Rethki were reptilian warriors who had served as shock troops for the Dominion until they saw a chance for freedom. The Morvith were engineers whose technology the Dominion had stolen. The Kalani were telepaths who had been enslaved and forced to serve as interrogators. All of them had come to Earth to fight, and all of them had been changed by what they found. Kethra received a transmission from Commander Sethkis of the Rethki volunteer force, and what he reported made her question everything she thought she knew about the universe. Ambassador, you must understand that nothing prepared us for the humans, Sethkis said through the communication link. His scaled face was animated with an emotion that Kethra had never seen in a Rethki before: joy. They are insane in the most wonderful way imaginable. Explain, Commander. When we first arrived, they treated us as allies, which we expected. But within days, they began treating us as something else, as family. They gave us names in their own languages. They invited us to share meals with them. They taught us their games and their songs and their stories. Sethkis leaned closer to the camera. Yesterday, a human soldier died protecting a member of my squad. He threw himself in front of a plasma bolt meant for Rethk warrior he had known for only 3 weeks. When I asked his commanding officer why a human would die for an alien he had just met, she looked at me like I was the strange one. He shook his head slowly. She said that we were part of the pack now, and that humans do not abandon their pack. I did not understand what that meant at first, but I am beginning to. Kethra had heard similar reports from the Morvith and Kalani volunteers. The humans had adopted them. There was no other word for it. They had extended the same fierce loyalty they showed to each other to species they had only just met. There was an incident 2 months ago that had spread across every communication network in the galaxy. A Rethki platoon had been ambushed by Valori forces in a radiation zone. The Valori had expected the humans to abandon their alien allies. After all, what species would risk their own lives for foreigners they barely knew? Instead, a human battalion had marched through the radiation zone to rescue them. The soldiers knew that the radiation exposure would kill them within weeks. They went anyway. They fought for 6 hours and dragged every single Rethki survivor to safety. 37 humans died from radiation poisoning over the following month. None of them regretted their choice. The last words of Sergeant Maria Gonzalez were recorded and shared across the Rethki homeworld. They were our people. That is all that matters. The Rethki had wept when they heard those words. Their entire species had been taught for generations that they were expendable tools of the Dominion. Now they had learned that humans would die for them, and they began to remember what freedom felt like. The ripple spread far beyond Earth. On 100 worlds that groaned under Dominion rule, people began to whisper a dangerous word: hope. If the humans could resist the Dominion, then maybe resistance was possible. If the humans could inspire such loyalty, then maybe the old alliances could be rebuilt. Kithra watched the reports pour in and felt the galaxy shifting beneath her feet. Slave uprisings on 3 Dominion worlds. Sabotage at a major shipyard. A Valori governor assassinated by his own servants. The humans have become a symbol, she wrote in her latest report to the Concord. They have shown the galaxy that the Dominion can be defied. Every day they survive is another day that hope grows stronger. But it was more than symbolism. The humans were actively reaching out to oppressed species across Dominion space. They sent messages of encouragement and tactical advice. They smuggled weapons to resistance movements. They welcomed anyone who wanted to fight alongside them. A Morvith engineer named Talvek had come to Earth as a refugee and found herself recruited into a human research team. She sent a message to Kethra that captured what was happening better than any official report. The humans do not see us as aliens, Talvek wrote. They see us as people who are not human yet. They assume that anyone who fights beside them will eventually become part of their family. It is terrifying and wonderful, and I cannot imagine going back to the way things were before. She included images of herself working alongside human scientists, and the contrast was striking. The Morvith were slender beings with 4 arms and large dark eyes. They should have looked strange surrounded by humans. Instead, they looked like they belonged. They have a phrase they use. Talvek continued. They say that we are all Earthlings now. At first, I thought they were being foolish, but I have come to understand what they mean. Earth is not just a planet to them, it is an idea. It is the idea that anyone can be family if they are willing to stand together. Kethra shared that message with the Concord Council and watched their reactions carefully. Most of them were afraid of what the humans represented and what their rise might mean for the careful balance of power that had kept the galaxy stable for millennia, but a few of them had a different look in their eyes. They were not afraid, they were inspired. After the council session ended, one of the elder ambassadors approached Kethra with a question that had no easy answer. Do you think they can win? Kethra thought about the humans she had met and the allies they had made, and the fire that burned in their eyes whenever they spoke about their cause. I do not know if they can defeat the Dominion, she admitted. But I am certain of one thing, they will never stop trying. And eventually, the Dominion will run out of soldiers willing to die fighting them. The elder ambassador nodded slowly and walked away without another word. Kethra returned to her office and watched the latest footage from Earth. It showed humans and Rethki and Morvith and Colony fighting side by side in the ruins of a Dominion landing zone. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with a unity that made them seem like one organism, one pack. She understood now why the Dominion was so afraid. It was not the human weapons or their tactics or their technology. It was their ability to make anyone who stood with them into family. It was the way they inspired loyalty that transcended species and culture and history. They were not just fighting a war. They were building something new. A coalition of the willing that grew stronger with every battle. And sooner or later that coalition would become too powerful, even for the Valori Dominion to ignore. The pack was awakening, and soon the galaxy would have to choose which side it was on. 3 years after the first plasma bolts fell on Earth, the war had spread across 40 star systems, and the Valori Dominion was dying. High Commander Thiessen, once the most feared military leader in the Arian Spur, sat alone in his quarters and stared at the surrender document on his desk. His hands trembled as he read the terms for the 100th time. Complete withdrawal from all human allied systems. Full reparations to Earth and its coalition partners. Recognition of human sovereignty. War crimes tribunals for officers who had authorized the initial bombardment. It was generous. Far more generous than the Dominion deserved. And Thiessen knew he had no choice but to accept the empire he had served his entire life was crumbling. Rebellions had erupted on dozens of worlds, inspired by the human example. Vassal species had defected to the growing coalition. The economy was collapsing under the weight of endless military spending. They had thrown everything at Earth: millions of soldiers, thousands of ships, weapons that could crack planets, and the humans had simply refused to die. Thiessen signed the document and sent it to Earth, and then he waited for the response that would determine his fate on Earth. The message arrived in the office of Director Yuki Tanaka, the elected leader of the United Earth Coalition. She was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much death. She had lost her entire family in the bombardment of Tokyo, which had come 6 months into the war. She read the Dominion's surrender offer and felt something cold settle in her chest. 27 million dead in the first attacks. Another 40 million in the years since. Cities reduced to rubble. Families torn apart. Children who would never know their parents. The Dominion thought they could make that right with a piece of paper. Director Tanaka called a meeting of the Coalition War Council, and they gathered in the bunker beneath Geneva that had served as humanity's command center for 3 years. Around the table sat representatives from every human nation and from the allied species who had come to stand with them. General Vasquez was there, older, now with more gray in her hair and scars on her face from a battle she refused to talk about. Commander Sefkis of the Rethki sat beside her, looking uncomfortable in the formal setting. Talvek, the Morvith engineer, was present, along with a Kalani diplomat named Mindweaver, who had chosen a human name to honor her adopted family. They read the surrender terms in silence. They want this to be over. General Vasquez said finally, they want to pretend it never happened. They want forgiveness, Mindweaver added, her telepathic voice echoing in their minds. They believe that surrender will wash away their crimes. Director Tanaka looked around the table at the faces of her allies, human and otherwise, and made her decision. Prepare a response broadcast, she ordered. I want it sent to every ship in the Dominion fleet and every world under their control. The galaxy needs to hear this. An hour later, her image appeared on screens across 1,000 worlds. She sat behind a simple desk with the flags of every coalition member hanging behind her. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with an intensity that made viewers lean closer to their screens. To the commanders of the Valory Dominion, she began. We have received your surrender offer, and we have considered it carefully. She paused and let the silence stretch. 3 years ago, your fleet appeared in our sky and demanded our submission. When we refused, you killed 27 million of our people in a single day. You destroyed Mumbai and Sao Paulo and Los Angeles. You thought you could break us with fire and death. Her voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath the words. You did not break us. You united us. For the first time in our history, humanity stood together against a common enemy. And then something remarkable happened. Other species joined us. The Rethki and the Morvith and the Kalani and dozens of others saw what we were fighting for, and they chose to fight beside us. She gestured. To the allies sitting behind her, you created something new when you attacked Earth. You created a family that spanned species and cultures and worlds. A family bound not by blood, but by shared sacrifice and common cause. Director Tanaka leaned forward. We accept your surrender. But understand this, we are not finished. The screen behind her changed to show a list of names. Thousands upon thousands of names scrolling past in an endless stream. These are the names of everyone who died in your first attacks. Every single one of them. We have recorded their stories and their faces and their dreams. We have built monuments to their memory on every continent of our world. The list continued scrolling, 27 million names that would take days to display in full. Did you think we would forget them? She asked, and her voice carried a weight that made Thiessen, watching from his flagship, feel physically small. We are humans. We do not forget. We write down our history, and we teach it to our children, and we carry our grudges across generations. You killed our people, and we will remember their names until the stars burn out. She stood and walked around her desk to face the camera directly. We will find every officer who authorized the bombardment. We will find every soldier who fired the weapons. We will find every official who called us primitives and dismissed our lives as worthless. And they will answer for what they did. Her eyes seemed to look directly at Thiessen through the screen. This is not revenge. This is justice. There is a difference, and you will learn it. She turned to address her allies. To our friends and partners in the coalition, thank you. You came to us when we were alone and desperate. You fought beside us and bled beside us and died beside us. You are our family now, and we will never forget your sacrifice. Finally, she turned back to the main camera. To the citizens of the Dominion worlds, your leaders told you that humans were primitive and weak. They told you that we would be easy to conquer. They were wrong. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy, and we are not the most advanced. But we are the most stubborn and the most loyal and the most unwilling to surrender. She straightened her shoulders. The war is over, but the work is not finished. We will build a new order in this part of the galaxy. One where no species has the right to conquer another. One where strength is used to protect the weak instead of exploit them. One where every being has the chance to live free. Her final words would be carved into memorial stones across 100 worlds. We are humanity. We came from a death world that tried to kill us every day of our existence. We survived ice ages and plagues and famines and 10,000 years of war against ourselves. And now we have survived you. She smiled, and it was not a kind expression. Remember that the next time you think about threatening what we love, the transmission ended in. The years that followed the Valory Dominion collapsed completely. War crimes tribunals were held, and justice was served. The coalition expanded to include hundreds of species who wanted to be part of what humanity had built. Ambassador Kethra of the Neutral Concord wrote the official history of the conflict, and her final assessment became required reading at every military academy in the galaxy. The humans are not the strongest species, she wrote. They are not the most advanced. They do not have the best weapons or the largest fleets. But they are, without question, the most relentless. They love deeply and hate completely. They forgive easily, but never forget. They adopt strangers as family, and they will die gladly, and without hesitation, for anyone they consider their own. The Valori Dominion made a simple mistake. They looked at humanity and saw prey. They saw a primitive species on a single world that would be easy to conquer and absorb. They did not see what humanity truly is, the apex, predator of a death world. A species forged by 10,000 years of constant warfare. Creatures who refuse to surrender and refuse to die, and refuse to stop fighting until their enemies are broken. Her final words became a warning passed down through generations of spacefaring civilizations. May whatever gods exist have mercy on anyone foolish enough to threaten what they love. Because the humans certainly will not. And across the galaxy, in academies and council, chambers and military headquarters, leaders of 1,000 species looked at that warning and remembered what had happened to the Valori Dominion, and they chose to be friends with humanity instead of enemies, because some lessons only need to be taught once.